Okay. So welcome. I hope you're enjoying the conference so far. I think it's been absolutely brilliant. I listened to the keynote panel and that was fantastic. And I hope you're going to get something out of this presentation too. Um, my background is actually in school libraries in the UK. I'm based in Epsom, which is in the southern part of the UK, which is where they run the famous Derby horse race. And I worked in schools, all sorts of different schools. I've worked in some European and international schools as well. And one of the things that I'm just so passionate about is how I think AI is really going to impact on teaching and learning of school children. And more importantly, I think it's going to mean a real change in the way in that we assess the learning that's taken place in the classroom. I'm also a bit passionate about information literacy. And I belong to FCLIP, which is what the Chartered Institute of Library and Information Professionals in the UK. And it's the national body for information workers. And we have a subgroup, which is the Information Literacy Committee. And I'm the school's representative on that as well. And I also have some dealings with a new organisation that's just been set up, which is called MILA, which is the Media and Information Literacy Alliance. And we're quite passionate about this stuff. And we're really curious to know how well can these AI chatbots understand what we mean by information literacy, because it's such a human process. So that's what we're going to be discussing in this session. And of course, my thing for moving slides on here doesn't work. Try it. Oh, no, it's not that one. Sorry. I have a problem here in that um, my little forward and back icons are hidden behind a white screen and they're in white, so that doesn't help. Anyway, this is our sponsor for the conference. So please, delve into that, have a look at that after and click on the links. But without further ado, what did I do for this experiment? Well, I thought I'm going to get some chatbots and I'm going to ask them 5 questions to really try and understand how they can tackle information literacy. So the first one was a really straightforward question. Are you information literate? What do you think? Then I thought, well, how can you say this answer if you state on your opening page that you make mistakes? And then I thought, well, if you think you're good at information literacy, are you actually able to teach this to school age children? And then I thought, well, do you know what? We think that they've got no personality, they're devoid of everything. And I thought, actually, this is rather like dealing with an autistic savant who knows an awful lot of information, but might not just have that human touch that's needed as well. So I posed that question to them to see what they came up with. Were they just regurgitation machines? And finally, I asked them whether they thought they were going to actually replace school librarians in their job. Because I think one of the problems with AI, one of the concerns with AI that a lot of people have got is that if we embrace it, then are we basically like turkeys voting for Christmas? Are we likely to be just doing ourselves out of employment? So those were the kind of frameworks. And I just wanted to explore whether any of the different chatbots came up with different answers, whether they interpreted the questions in a different way. And if so, which ones should we be choosing when it came to helping us with our work? So here are the 5 that I started out with. We have Claude. I don't know how many people have used these, but Claude I like to think of as being like sensible Chat GPT. Chat GPT might use 100 words to write something and Claude will just write 5. So it kind of cuts out the frills, really. Then we've got Gemini, which is Google's all singing and dancing chatbot, which came out of Bard. We've got Copilot, which again, is the Microsoft equivalent and puts itself out as being, again, a comprehensive service bringing together different elements of different chat books. And finally, we have Pi. How do we describe Pi? A mad professor? Pi never really tells you the answer. It just asks you more questions. And I quite like Pi for certain things because it helps me with metacognition. It helps me with critical thinking as well. So I kind of played around with these little bots and thought of them as my friends. That's very sad, isn't it? But I did. And then I thought, well, how are they going to answer these questions? So let's take the first one. Are you information literate? Without exception, they all leapt straight in and said, yes, we are totally information literate. And then I said, well, describe this a bit more. Why do you say that? And we came up with a few little changes. We came up with, well, we would, if I could find the moving on button here, which is, for some reason, this is not working. There we go. So yeah, so Gemini Copilot and Pi came up with defining information literacy, all the sorts of different things you would think about, like finding information, evaluating information, constructing information together in a new sense and presenting it and being reflective and so on. So it came up with all the different things that you would establish with the actual physical doing of information literacy, but it wasn't really explaining whether it was information literate. It just came up with definitions for what you should encompass if you were saying somebody's information literate. It didn't say whether it actually could meet those competencies or not. The only ones that gave a little bit of a clue about it were Claude, which said, I'm only basing it on my training data. It's to do with that. And I don't really have that deeper understanding that a human being would have. Put it quite succinctly. OpenAI, on the other hand, ChatGPT, said, well, I'm not a human. I don't know how to do this. I can generate responses. And that's why it was coming up with the standard definition for information literacy. So immediately we can see that there are differences between them. Those that are ready to admit that maybe they're not quite as information literate as they leapt in to say at the start. Pi, incidentally, came in and it said, I'm pretty darn information literate. Look at all the things I can do. But it didn't actually explain how it was going to do them. It just stated that. So we need to take these things with a pinch of salt. And one of the things I liked about this kind of inquiry for them is that I think it kind of helps you understand where their limitations are. And we're going to see more of that as we go on, because there are definitely limitations. So question number 2 was, well, how do you say that you're information literate if you make mistakes? And they all said on their front pages, every single one of them had this rider saying, but we may not be very accurate. So let's have a little look and see how that differentiated. Well, they all said this, and this was quite honest of them. They said that they were so reliant on their training sets that inevitably there were going to be limitations. Some of them said, I can't provide up-to-date information. It's historical information, sometimes 2 years old, so I can't really do it. And others said, yes, but I'm biased. It depends where I've got the information from. They also said that, you know, they were robots. They were trained computer programs, and they couldn't really understand any colloquialisms in terms of natural language, and that was a difficulty, particularly when it came to something like information literacy, which is so subjective. Why is information literacy so subjective? Well, I did some quite interesting research, and I found out that one of the reasons why we don't really have as good a definition of information literacy as perhaps we do with some other subjects, even say information technology, is because in historical terms, it has never actually been a curricular subject. And therefore, if it's not a curricular subject, it doesn't have a controlled vocabulary. If it doesn't have a controlled vocabulary, it can't be assessed. And so that's why I can say information literacy to you. What we've got over 100 people here in the room, and I bet you I'll get 100 different answers because it means different things to different people. And that is a challenge, I think, that the AI faces when it is something you're talking something with it that's subjective. When it's not objective, there are a lot of difficulties because of this natural language programming. And that's where the bias and the hallucinations come in. I think that it's so confident, the AI. This is why it leaps in and it says, yes, of course I can do that. I'm brilliant at it. And it will tell you that until you go back to it and you start asking it to think about the answer, just as you would with a child, with a school child. You know, you interrogate, well, how come you've got to that answer? And that's something that I don't think we teach enough with AI. We just accept what it gives us without challenging it. And that's what we need to begin to learn to do. So it can't cope with anything that's evolving. If a new information literacy model came out tomorrow, it really wouldn't know what that was and it wouldn't be able to answer it. And that's why we've got to be very careful with our use of it. However, like in the last question, there were some differences between them. They all quoted this mantra that's there in the red writing. But Gemini actually went that little step further. And this is something that I think you'll notice with Gemini is that it will say these things, then it tells you how it limits the danger with these and how it corrects itself. So that's a difference that certainly came out. And so it was thoughtful and it thought about, well, you know, I need to learn from the feedbacks that I can improve over time. So it's inviting you to join in on the conversation. It's asking you to remember to cite where you got the information from and to be aware of where it might be fallible and so on. So that's quite interesting that that was different. And we're going to see that in the answer to some other questions too. So the next thing is really to make sure on this one that if we are truly information literate, we need to know our own limitations. And that's not just in terms of the chatbots, but we need to know ourselves. If we don't understand it, we don't understand what we're looking for, we expose ourselves open to those biases, to those hallucinations and those untruths that the chatbots might give us. So I think this is a lesson we can learn really with using AI, that the more we know about a subject, the better the result we're going to get from the chatbot. One of the things I really think chatbots are excellent at are the ones where they allow you to upload your own work so that you can be critical of your own work. And I love the idea of the personal tutor so that you can actually use the AI within a defined safety limit of where the information comes from. Those are going to be truly, well, life-changing things because, you know, we will know that the information they're working on is correct, but they're just going to give us a shortcut. They're going to reduce our cognitive load so that we can get on with the more exciting stuff that we might want to explore. And that's something I think they're going to be really good at in the future. How much they can cope with subjective information, I'm not really sure, and I don't think we're anywhere near that yet. So what about, could they teach information literacy to school-aged children? How are they going to get on with that task? Well, again, few differences came out. They all said, we've got weaknesses because we can't do this alone. What they can do is they can design lessons. They could even design activities that you might do within it, but they can't really deliver the lesson as is. That's still going to require some human input because one of the things that humans do is that they can give that real-time feedback. They're watching what the students are doing in the classroom and actually encouraging them to take different pathways if they need to, and to be a little bit more interactive in what they do. And when it comes to doing a learning exercise that involves some kind of gamification or something like that, then you need somebody there. And it's just even to provide the odd prompt, or just to go, an encouragement, that sort of thing. And that's really what an AI model can't do. Somebody said that, an AI model is so good if you went to a meeting, big meeting, say a senior leaders meeting or something at the school, it would be super efficient at taking the notes of the meeting. But what it couldn't pick up on are all the little asides, all the little conversations and nuances that people had that they then reported back at the end. It wouldn't be able to do that because it wouldn't understand that. And it knows this. That's what's so good, is that generally it's aware that this is a weak point in the use of them. So do they understand these nuances? Can they do that? Or are they just regurgitating definitions? Are they just like an autistic savant who just churns out the answers for people? What can we learn from that? Well, again, there were some interesting differences. Gemini said that it could highlight certain parts of the text and potential biases that come back. But it said, I really can't deal with the deeper reasoning. I can't, because I'm not a natural language speaker, I can't put things into context. I can't help you with the critical thinking. That's really up to you. And it's quite interesting because some of the other ones on there, they were sort of saying, well, I need your help on this. So you need to tell me where I'm going wrong. And they were asking for that. Well, a school student is putting stuff into here looking for answers. It doesn't know where they're going wrong because they're students. Maybe they haven't got that amount of information already. So this is where it puts them into that danger zone. As we said before, if you don't know enough about a particular subject, then it's very difficult to see where you're going wrong in terms of the context. Copilot was saying, well, I can't do it, but look, here are some resources that can. So why don't you go off there and read some of their information, and then perhaps you'll understand more about this subject matter. Well, that's quite good. It is giving us that guidance, and I quite like that. And the other thing I quite like about Copilot is the fact that it does give you real references. So if you click on something, it will actually take you to a document that exists on the internet. So you can actually see it and you can say, oh, this is real. Maybe I'll go into that and read that and delve into it a bit more. So I think this is, again, is a difference that we can see between them. The other ones, I'm afraid, weren't really quite so forthcoming. They just said, yes, point taken. I think you're right. So they weren't even going to go down that road. And they were sort of saying, no, it's something I'm not able to do. I'm a robot. They said, I haven't got human emotions. Interestingly, they did say, I can't be an autistic savant because I'm not human. They quite often use that argument. But it's interesting. They said, I'm a computer program, and they weren't going any further. So then I thought, well, another thing I could do is to see and introduce, says, finding the forward button on here. I thought, what if I introduce another robot? So I'm going to go for Canva. I don't know how many people out there use Canva, but one of the great things about Canva is it's free for education. So it's quite a good chatbot to actually use. And I thought with Canva, they've got this thing called Magic Button where you can go into it and you can draw something. And I thought, what would happen if I asked it to draw information literacy? What kind of result would I get out? And so that's what I did. And this is what I got out. And I think it's quite interesting because this is sort of saying every time I did it, even when I regenerated it, constantly came out with the tools that you needed to explain information literacy. It didn't actually explain information literacy itself or anything about it. It just came up with computers, books, pens, diaries, things like that. That's all it could come up with. And then I thought, well, what happens if you go and look for human generated images of information literacy on the web? And a lot of them came up with something like this. And when I looked at it, I thought, yeah, this is all about the content. It's all about how we describe information literacy. It's not how can we do it, it's the process of what it means and what it means to us in terms of actually getting people to understand what we mean by the concept of it. And so these two things were very, very different when it came to the drawing of it. And I think this kind of exemplifies again that little bit of the lack of understanding that there is, and the fact that if it's factually based, then these chatbots can cope very well. But as soon as you introduce something more subjective, not really going to happen in the way you hope. And this is a message that I think we need to get across to our students, because if they don't understand this, they start asking the chatbots the wrong kind of questions that they really can't cope with. And if a student is not well versed in that topic and the chatbot comes back, they're going to get a very bland answer. And we know that's where we can, there's been a lot of talk on here about how can you detect if something's AI written. Well, I think one of the first things you can detect if AI is written is, one, if it uses the word fostering, and secondly, if it uses the word leverage, because those two words come up in virtually every single chatbot generated text. And so we can tell immediately. So tell your students to watch out for those words. Chatbot. But, you know, there are other things that it's the blandness, it's the devoid of personality that tells us that it's AI generated. And the trouble with that is that we haven't really got that lovely creativity that humans can produce. So I think one of the things AI is going to do is it's going to change us from being writers into being editors. And I think that we will get much better at putting our own voice into a basic structure, at creating something more with it. And you could draw an analogy. I know somebody did this before with the calculator and how the calculator happens. And now, you know, we might use a calculator to do the basic maths, but if we want to be really creative with our maths, we've got to have that human touch, that looking differently at the aspect of the problem. And I think it's not helped because assessment is so geared towards just getting the answer. That's what they want. They don't want the process. And unless you're lucky enough to do some kind of assignment-based project that's marked more holistically. But generally, certainly in England, they look at regurgitation of facts, they mark it on that. And that's what the chat is very good at. But what it can't do is that finding out and how you apply that knowledge to other situations. That's what it can't do. And that's what we need to be assessing in the future. So if that is the case, final question is, are you going to replace a school librarian? Well, here I've got great news for everybody, because absolutely unanimously, all of my little chatbot friends said no. And the reason they said no was because they said, you've got to have a human teacher there. You've got to have somebody there who can explain where the gaps are and explain the creativity and prompt you into being more curious and to finding out more. Gemini said, yeah, librarians, they do this wonderful thing where they engage the students in the learning process and they can give that personalized, immediate feedback and assistance to prompt people to go into other directions. And that's something that the chatbots just are not very good at. So it was good that they realized this, I think. It really came out. Why are humans better for some of these things? Why do we need human librarians? Because of that personalisation and that support. Also, we decide which books we're going to have or which resources we're going to have in the library. We can create that love of reading. We can prompt people through into actually what we want them to understand about a particular author and the way a particular author's brain works and why they come up with the vocabulary they do and things like that. It also means that we can build partnerships. You're not learning by yourself, but you're bringing lots of other people in. And that brings in the discussion and sparks the creativity that might happen. And also, we can actually work with students who've got particular learning difficulties that we want to help them to overcome. And that's something that humans can do. So the final part really is the other deficiencies in AI chatbots. One of them, and this was touched upon in that keynote panel at the beginning, is the cultural context. Because how do we know what to trust? And how we know what to trust depends very much on where the data that's in the chatbot has come from. It's come from Western society with a load of academic papers. That's going to be very different from a bot that's been trained on an oral tradition, maybe from a different set of cultures in a different country in another part of the world. And so that westernized sort of academic collegiate type learning and the more, perhaps informal, but oral based learning is very different. Neither is more valid than the other. And probably in certain contexts, we should be relying on something that maybe as Westerners, we don't always regard as having that academic authority, but it does. And so we need to be aware of that. And we need to be aware of that when we're asking particular types of question. And the other part is that the student, so how the student takes on board this, we need to help them to understand how these chatbots work and how they can get the most out of them. I mean, as I said before, if I was doing data crunching, straight into it. I could use something like ChatGPT-4 to do all my analysis and charts. Then I would spend my time doing the analysis and saying what's coming out of these. If I wanted to compare a lot of papers that I'd written and get an overview of them, I'd use an AI like Doc Analyzer and get that through. It's my work. All I'm doing is getting it to help me to bring out the things that I need to. And if I've like analysing long papers or a whole book, that's going to be so much better and give me the space and time I need. So many teachers and librarians complain about being time poor. And this is a way that we can enrich our cognitive values so that we can spend more time on the things that humans are good at. So I think the final thing to say is that, chatbots are assistants, they're our friends, and, we can, they can help us, they can sort of eke us out through the noise that's going on. We can be more succinct in how we plan things and we can work with them. And if we strike the right balance, we're going to get there. They're going to help us to develop our global citizens of the future. So thank you very much for staying with the chat. If there are any questions, then please feel free. Some of my references. Please feel free to ask me. Do feel free to contact me if you want on my email if you want to ask any more about this. And I have actually got the actual chatbot things as well, if anybody like those. But I hope you found it interesting. Go away and play. Well, thank you too. Go and ask it awkward questions.